Good morning, everybody, and thanks and welcome to the latest in our Gender on the Agenda series, sponsored by Mott, MacDonald and Urban Transport Group. I'm Becky Fuller, I'm Assistant Director at Urban Transport Group. And in today's webinar, we're going to be taking stock of progress made on tackling violence against women and girls on transport. Just over a year on from the publication of the government strategy on this, which, among other things, announced the appointment of 2 violence against women and girls transport champions. And I'm delighted that we're joined today by one of those champions, Anne Shaw, who's also the Executive Director at Transport for West Midlands. We'll also be hearing from Faith Wilkinson, Head of Inclusive Travel at DFT, Nia Mellor, Detective Chief Inspector at the British Transport Police and also Portfolio Lead for Sexual Offences and Violence Against Women and Girls, and also Nikki Swanson, TravelSafe Officer at Liverpool City Region and Chair of Urban Transport Group's Safety and Security Working Group. So just to give you an overview of how the session will work today, we'll start with presentations from Anne and Faith to give us the big picture of the strategic work that's been going on. There'll then be an opportunity for a Q&A. We'll then be moving on to putting strategy into action on the ground with presentations from Nia and from Nikki, followed by another Q&A with all of the panel. Many of you have submitted questions in advance. Thanks for those. We'll try and get to as many as we can. You can also submit your questions during the session via the Q&A box. Please don't post questions in the chat because we might miss them. However, we're aware that some users may not be able to see the Q&A box, and if that's you, you have special permission to post questions in the chat and we'll copy them across to the Q&A section. Everyone else use the Q&A box and keep those questions coming in. So I'll now hand over to Anne for the first presentation.
Okay, so good morning, everybody. And firstly, I'm going to apologise because our office is currently testing the fire alarm. So apologies if you can hear that in the background, but I'll carry on the hope that you'll still be able to hear me anyway. So thank you for asking me to present at this event. So if we just go on to the next slide. I'll just do some introductions about what does it mean about being the champion for the Department for Transport in terms of looking at violence against women and girls in transport as well. So myself and Laura Shoaf, who's the Chief Executive of the West Midlands Combined Authority, were asked by the then Minister to support her in work to look at, as part of the government's wider agenda, what does it mean for women in transport? How are we making sure that our transport systems are safe for women and girls as they travel around? So we've been looking at that since 2021 as well. And if we go on to the next slide, I'll just explain to you why we think that this is important. Now, we know that there are a large number of women who experience harassment, sexual harassment and other types of harassment whilst using public transport. But we also know that there is a large number of things that do go unreported as well. So there's questions about how we collecting the information, how do we understand the impact that this has on women and girls as they're travelling around on the transport network, walking around in our streets as well, and just making sure that we're actually understanding the issues and encouraging better reporting around this as well. We also wanted to make sure that we were looking at the kinds of journeys that women make. They're very different to other journeys as well, particularly if we have trip chaining. You know, if you've got caring responsibilities, you're dropping children off at school before you make your way into work, or other caring responsibilities. And also there's a large proportion of women in the workforce who actually work more on social hours as well. So how are we making sure that the transport system is actually working for them? And then we know that there's a lot of unwanted behaviours. So 90% of women have experienced unwanted behaviours as part of this. And as a result of all of these factors, it's really having an impact on how women and girls are contributing into society as well. They're denying themselves opportunities by not accessing public transport, whether it's to education, to work and employment opportunities, or whether it's to more social things that they can enjoy as well. So this is the real reason why we need to start looking at how are we addressing violence against women and girls on the transport system. If you move on to the next slide, I just wanted to talk a little bit about how we went about this. Now, we had quite a large number of organisations that ranged from police authorities, charities, people who work with the victims of sort of sexual harassment and other kinds of crime as well as transport professionals, people who were working in public transport, either as bus operators or rail operators, alongside to transport planners and all of our consultancies as well. So we had a really good representation, and it wasn't just women who were in the room. We had quite a lot of men that joined us around this as well, wanting to understand more and contribute to the information that we were seeking out. So there were a number of roundtable events. We had over 200 participants as part of that, and we also were supported in collecting a little bit more survey data as well. So Transport Focus did a specific piece of work for us as well around this, and then there's also other transport surveys that have been distributed, and particularly through the support of the Urban Transport Group as well. And it really provided us with some really rich content about what we need to understand in terms of what we need to address around violence against women and girls in the transport system. If you move on to the next slide. So there are six key areas that we actually talked about that we were exploring. So transport policy making in particular, how does that reflect the needs of women and girls in the transport system? Who is actually making those policy decisions? What are we reflecting in terms of that as well? And there's some really good information that came out of that, and particularly looking at how the transport planning system works and the sort of gender bias that exists, or a lack of gender equality in terms of policy making and thinking as well. And then infrastructure design and maintenance was a real key issue as well. Welcoming spaces that feel safe and secure. Staffing, we're seeing some examples where staffing is being considered to be reduced, particularly in our rail network. But having staff in key locations on the transport system was seen as a key thing to contributing to that sort of perception of safety as well. Transport staff then, as part of that, we've got people in uniforms out on the front line, people who are trusted in those positions. How are we making sure that those people are actually part of that trusted network? So if somebody is in difficulty, there's a trusted transport member of staff who they can go to seek help as well. And what training and other things need to happen around that. We also wanted to look at the communication and awareness. We definitely found that there was lots of really great examples of how this kind of stuff is communicated, and how we're encouraging people to report problems that are seen out on the network as well, and also creating awareness around it. But there were also some barriers, and I think particularly around the innovation and technology. We've got multiple systems, so depending on where you are in the country, there's multiple ways in which you can record an incident. But again, some fantastic examples of how some of those things work. And of course, the barriers around technology in terms of collecting the data and understanding the problems as well. And then some of the perceptions that, well, what's the point of reporting, because there is nobody at the other end who's taking notice of what it is that we're saying. And then that links back into the enforcement. So we've got British Transport Police, we've got other police forces and other enforcement officers that are out and about on the transport system. So how are we bringing them together to make sure that we've got people who are responding to issues as they're occurring, investigating incidents, and bringing people to justice where they've got the evidence around that as well. So they were the key themes that we were talking about, and then of course that led to a number of recommendations. So if we just go on to the next slide. We published the recommendations in January 22 with the then minister. We've since had a change of minister again to Baroness Fear. And there were 13 recommendations in there, and I think somebody will post into the chat the link to the document that sets out the recommendations. But there were some real key themes that came as part of this work. So particularly better national transport planning and guidance on ways to make transport and infrastructure safer and clear. The monitored reporting in particular about how we're managing the infrastructure, dealing with damage and so on. We also wanted to make sure that in transport planning terms that we had better aggregated data around women and girls using the transport system, making sure that we were bringing that information into how we're planning as well. There were other key recommendations. So, for example, we know that we've still got a shortage of women in the transport sector. There's lots of things that have been happening since that time, but there's still more work to be done to make sure that we've got people who are able to design, do the policy work, do the design work, and also implement the delivery around some of these things, constantly making sure that the gender bias is removed from all of those stages of managing the transport system as well. So there was some, I think you need to take some time out to just have a look at that report, the 13 recommendations that are in there as well. So I think if I just go on to some of the key findings on the next slide as well, it was certainly very strongly felt by all of the participants, the men and the women that were included in this work, that no woman or girl should actually need to change their own behaviour. Instead, we needed to make sure that we were targeting the perpetrator and creating less hostile environments as part of this work as well. And that is something that we need to take into all aspects of what we are doing around providing transport systems, managing and maintaining transport systems, and the network that is available as well. It was also recognised that there were very different lived experiences. I mean, some of the input, particularly from the charities that are supporting victims, was really insightful into the impacts that this really has and how it really does affect women sort of taking up life opportunities as well. So that, again, those barriers really stark in some cases as well. And absolutely, the data and the information that we are collecting, the gender bias needs to be addressed as part of this as well. If you've tried to get down into sort of any aggregated level of information, it's just not there for us to do some of the analysis that we need to do in order to provide the solutions around this as well. And then, of course, one of the key things was that there were really some great pockets of fantastic examples of where these are being delivered, but how do we harmonise that across the country? How do we make sure that we've got a method which we can all sort of learn from, and taking some of that good practice and extending it across the networks across the UK as well. So what are Laura and I continuing to do, so if you move on to the next slide, we are still in touch with the DFT. We've set out a bit of an action plan, a bit of a timeline. So some of the recommendations are ordered into what's our first order of priorities and what are sort of the medium and longer term ambitions that we've got as well. And we're sort of checking in with DFT to make sure that they're starting to embed this, not a sort of standalone thing within DFT, but actually embedding this across all of the work that happens across the DFT, and then with us as local transport authorities or within transport operations as well, and then working collaboratively with the enforcement agencies around this as well. So we're having those continued conversations. Laura and I are due to come and see Baroness Via and check in with how things are going as well. And then I thought I couldn't really leave without addressing what are we doing here at Transport for West Midlands. So as the Managing Director of Transport for West Midlands, I've got a responsibility to make sure that what I've said that others should be looking at, we are also practicing here as well. And we probably will get into a little bit of that a bit later on as we go through some of the other presentations. But if we move on to the next slide, I'll just give you a quick flavour of what we've done, and particularly as we had the Commonwealth Games here in the summer, which was fantastic. One of our key things around this was actually we've got a lot of visitors coming to Birmingham and the West Midlands, people who are very unfamiliar with the geography and the layout and where to go and where to catch public transport from as well. So we had a real focus on those people, 650,000 journeys made on buses, dedicated shuttle buses, and then additional journeys on the traditional bus network as well. And we worked with West Midlands Police, who were providing the security operations, and also our Safer Travel partnership, to make sure that the violence against women and girls, or any sort of undue attention during the Commonwealth Games, was tackled very quickly as part of that as well. If you move on to the next slide, then just on concluding thoughts, I think we've got some things around increased surveillance. I think that was another thing that came out, is CCTV technology and how we're best using that technology, but also people knowing that there is somebody at the other end who is using the intelligence that comes from there to tackle, sort of collect data and analyse hotspots, and then put tasking in to make sure that they're being dealt with. We also are looking at rolling out the environmental design measures as part of this as well. So things like visibility, lighting, alarms, phones, all of those other things around that as well. And then obviously the continued work that we will do, both for me personally within the authority that I run and lead, making sure that we're delivering a safer environment for women and girls, but also I'll continue to work with the DFT on those things as well. And then I think the last slide is just a bit of a slide that shows you all of the partners that helped us create these recommendations and submit them to the Minister, and obviously for that continued work as well. And we're wanting to make sure that we keep in touch with all of these different organisations so that they can see that the continued work that will happen. So I'll finish there and I'll hand back over to Rebecca. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anne. I'll now hand straight over to Faith from DFT for the next presentation.
Thank you, Becky. And thank you for inviting me to speak today as part of this brilliant series of events through the Gender on the Agenda. So today I'll be setting out the kind of wider context for government's overall position on tackling violence against women and girls, or VAWG, and then I'll move on to transport specifically. Firstly, I wanted to just give a note on terminology, especially as language is so important with this topic. So when government uses the term violence against women and girls, this is referring to acts of violence or abuse that we know disproportionately affect women and girls. So crimes and behaviour covered by this term include rape, other sexual offences, domestic abuse, stalking, and many others. So while we use the term violence against women and girls, this actually refers to all victims of these offences, regardless of the victim's sex. Moving on to the next slide, please. So in July 2021, as Becky mentioned in her intro, the Home Office published the Cross-Government Tackling Violence Against Women and Girls strategy. And this was actually followed then in March of this year with a complementary Cross-Government Tackling Domestic Abuse plan. These documents together aim to transform the whole of society's response to these crimes, with actions to prevent abuse, support survivors and pursue perpetrators, as well as to strengthen systems to respond to VAWG. They were both informed by the Violence Against Women and Girls Call for Evidence, which the Home Office ran in 2021, and this call for evidence received an unprecedented response with over 180,000 contributions. Next slide, please. Now I'll start with some example actions from government focusing on Home Office. This is not an exhaustive list, and in the time I'm not going to even be able to cover everything on this list, but just highlighting a few from here. So the Home Office launched an online tool called StreetSafe last year, which enables the public to anonymously report areas where they feel unsafe. StreetSafe was developed in cooperation by the Home Office and the National Police Chiefs Council, and as I say, launched in September last year, initially as a pilot, but has since been made permanent. There have been over 20,000 reports made by the tool so far, and the reports have allowed the police to make more targeted patrols, increase presence and identify new hotspots. They have also provided policing partners such as local authorities and neighbourhood watch groups with new intelligence and resulting in improvements such as new street lighting. The Home Office also allocated £55 million to communities across England and Wales through both the Safer Streets Fund and the Safety of Women at Night Fund. These projects funded through these include extra CCTV, street lighting and work to change attitudes and behaviours to prevent crimes happening in the first place. And the British Transport Police have also used this funding to develop their Railway Guardian app. And Home Office have also launched the first 2 phases of a national communications campaign called Enough, And the picture on the screen now is an example poster from that campaign. This highlights the role of the bystander and looks to empower members of the public with practical tips and advice on how to spot and safely intervene when they see abuse against women and girls. It also encourages individuals to reflect on their own behaviour and also signposts victims to support all reporting services. The campaign messaging was developed in partnership with 40 voluntary sector organisations, and phase 2 of the campaign with posters like this are running at the moment. It was launched at the end of October. So you may have seen these posters recently, and I'd really encourage you to also look at the website, which is gov.uk/enough, which has more resources, including the materials from the campaign, which can be downloaded for use. Next slide, please. So now to transport specifically, and again, another note on terminology. So in the Department for Transport, we use the same definition of VAWG, or violence against women and girls, as the Home Office. And in our approach, we also factor in perceptions of personal safety, because as Anne mentioned, we know the perceptions of safety also has a significant impact on how women and girls travel, or indeed if they decide to take a journey at all. And the principle of safe access to transport must be embedded in the core objectives of everything that we do. This will make the network more welcoming, not just to women and girls, but to all transport users who may at times feel threatened. And this is a fundamental part of our strategic objective to improve transport for the user. Now, again, there's an exhaustive list of actions, and again, I won't be able to go through everything on the list in the time of the presentation before we get on to Q&A, but just to highlight a few. So as Anne has said, in July last year, government appointed both Anne and Laura Shoaf as the joint transport champions for tackling violence against women and girls. And the report that they published in March this year, following that engagement with over 200 stakeholders that Anne spoke of, really does continue to inform and direct our actions. As Anne said, there are 13 recommendations, and each of those also has sub-recommendations. So if you haven't read the report, I really do recommend that you do. And so data, moving on, is vital to understand and addressing this complex, sorry, still on that slide, Mark, sorry. Data is vital to understanding and addressing this complex issue. Two examples of that here are the work from the department to make real-time information for buses available to all, which will reduce wait times and improve journey planning. And we are also working with social researchers to incorporate questions relating to personal safety and perceptions of safety while travelling into regular surveys undertaken by or for the department. We are also revising the manual for streets, which is our key piece of design guidance on creating streets for people. We ran a call for evidence on street safety, which concluded last year, which asked for information and evidence on what design features would make streets feel safer. The results have been analysed and are being used in the update for manual for streets, which is expected next year. And then we have also funded a 10-month project with the Connected Places Catapult in response to the recommendation to embrace more uses of technology to combat VAWG. And this project will provide evidence on any barriers and gaps in the market for interventions in technology and taking a holistic view of the full journey. This project is due to report its findings to us at the end of February and will highlight to us where government and industry should target future investment for interventions which support women and girls' personal safety on the transport system. Next slide, please. And then next slide, please. So as Anne mentioned, violence against women and girls is a societal-wide problem. However, everyone in the transport industry can join in taking action to tackle this. And we really do need to work together, including to implement those recommendations. I know we have a fantastic range of delegates listening today from across the transport industry, local government and interest groups. And I'd really ask you all to think about what you can do to contribute here as well. As I said, firstly, reading the recommendations and reflecting on how they apply in your context. Please, if you can seek opportunities to share data, share insights and good practice, especially with training and the use of technology, sharing with your peers and also with us. Where you can, embed consideration of personal safety throughout your systems in decision making. And last but not least, as mentioned before, the Enough campaign materials can be downloaded, so you're able to download those and share those through your own channels as well, which would be brilliant. And lastly, if you would like to engage further with us in the department, please do get in touch. My email address is up on the screen. It's faith.wilkinson@dft.gov.uk. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Faith, and thanks, Anne. Please post your questions to Anne and Faith in the Q&A box. But while I'm waiting for those to come through, I'll come to a question that came through before the session, and that is: are trans women included in efforts to tackle violence against women and girls? And related to that, do you have any insight around how the experiences of gender diverse people may differ, or indeed how intersectionality plays a part more generally?
Thanks,
Do
Becky.
you
I'll
want me
come in
to?
first there.
Yeah, okay.
Sorry. We'll get into the swing of this, I'm sure. So the short answer to that question is yes. So as I said earlier, our definition of violence against women and girls is not specific to the sex of or the gender identity of the victim. It's focused on the type of crime. I'd also just want to flag though as well that there are additional hate crime laws that are in addition to kind of the crimes we're discussing today in place to protect people who experience harassment because of their sexual orientation or gender identity. In terms of intersectionality, I think it's fair to say that this is an under-researched area within an under-researched area, and we know that intersectionality and people's different characteristics do impact their experience on transport. For example, in the project that we're doing with Connected Places Catapult, we've asked them to take further in-depth look at disabled women's experiences and also experiences of school-age girls, so secondary school-age girls, so that we can try and understand again how those different characteristics impact their interactions.
Yeah, just to add to that as well, Becky, there was some work as part of what we did. Specifically, Atkins did some additional work around this particular side of things as well. I think that there is a document that's available that can be read as part of this, and definitely I think what came from that as well is that the issues are fairly similar in terms of the level of the kind of hate crimes or other things that happen that Faith talked about earlier. And in doing the work that we did about these recommendations, they were in support of those recommendations because they could see that they were of value in terms of making it safer for that particular group as well.
Great, and I think what came through really strongly in the recommendations and in both of your presentations is data, or the lack of it. I wondered what impact does the data we collect or don't collect have on our ability to understand and tackle violence against women and girls, and how might academic researchers, how might government work to try and fill those gaps? Shall I come to you first, Faith?
Yeah, so I think I mentioned a couple of things in my presentation of where we're seeking to kind of continue to build that evidence base. So the project with Connected Places Catapult, we're also working with social researchers in the department to create additional questions that we can include in things like the National Travel Attitude Survey, and also actually the National Transport Survey, the sample size of that is being doubled to 25,000 households from next year. So that should help us get deeper, richer data that we can also start to think about those multiple characteristics as well. I think the important point as well is the sensitivity needed, and when we're asking questions about these issues, and being really conscious and careful with the phrasing that we use and the terminology that we use to make sure that people responding to those surveys understand what they're being asked and also understand how that information is going to be used.
There was also some basics as well. So even in reporting crimes, some basic information is missed, which could help us really sort of understand and analyse these kinds of crimes as well. So there's a review needed around some of those basic things as well, I feel, and just really making sure that the other issue is really about the underreporting. So the right platforms for people to actually report these incidents, and then that information is also held disparately across the UK. So bringing some of that data, those data sets together, is very difficult in order for us to do sort of more national research, but also then really important for us to look at the hotspots in locations as well. The underreporting is an issue because it doesn't help you understand the key hotspots on your network. So how do we address that? And then the level, the sort of granular detail that is required. As Faith says, we need to be really careful around the phraseology of some of these things, but how do we make sure that we've got that granular level as well, and fixing some of the basics as well as doing some of the new stuff that Faith is talking about is really important.
Thank you. I think the other thing I've noticed from a lot of these debates is the impact that it has, that the transport sector is still very much dominated by men. It tends to be a male-dominated industry. So I wondered if you'd like to say something about the impact that has on decisions and the priorities that we have, and what difference it would make if we could get a bit more of a gender-balanced workforce within the transport sector. And maybe I could come to you first on that one.
Yeah, absolutely. So what really came out strongly within the research that we did was that we need more women in the design space. So designing good infrastructure that is suitable for women and other vulnerable users really needs to be thought about as well. And the kind of journeys that are made. So it's not all about commuters, well, certainly not post-COVID anymore. It is about the kinds of journeys, the trip chaining that women in particular take, and the street environment, you know, the local bus stop near to where you live. It isn't just about transport hubs, it's about this sort of front door to front door journeys as part of that as well. We need more women who are sort of in that design space thinking. And then of course we need more women just generally working either providing transport frontline or in terms of the maintenance side of things as well. So it's a problem that we've got across the whole sector. It translates into many different ways. And then some of the processes that we follow to authorise new transport investment don't necessarily take all of these things into consideration as well. And that's the sort of stuff that Faith was talking about with the revision of some of those core government policies as well.
Yeah, I absolutely echo everything that Anne's just said there, of it kind of being a problem at every level in the transport sector and needing to be embedded throughout. And increasing the diversity of the workforce, of the transport workforce, is definitely one of DfT's focuses. So this year, DfT, so the department, conducted a call for views on transport labour market and skills. A summary of those responses to that call for ideas was published in August of this year, and that summary also announced an industry-led transport employment and skills task force, or TEST, because we've got to have an acronym, which is chaired by the president of the Institution of Civil Engineers, Rachel Skinner, and has a sort of broad membership from across the industry. That task force is currently working to establish a strategic vision for the transport sector, and from that vision there will be resultant work streams that will aim to address issues around skills, knowledge of transport careers, and also practices in the sector. So trying to again take a kind of holistic view at each stage of the journey, of the career journey.
Thank you, Faith. And just a reminder to everyone, please do send your questions in. If you're having any trouble with the Q&A section, please pop your questions in the chat and we'll make sure they make their way across to the Q&A section. But perhaps a good segue into the interventions on the ground section of this webinar. Anne, I wondered if you could explain some of the ways you went about delivering a safe public transport Commonwealth Games, and what was some of how you implemented some of those findings from your research into how you tackled the games.
Yeah, we had quite a lot of visitors. I think over 1.2 million visitors to the West Midlands, and of course that's families, women, girls as well. And as I said in my presentation, obviously quite a lot of people unfamiliar with this location as part of that. So we wanted a number of things that we needed to deliver outside of in relation to the Commonwealth Games, safety being one of those key things as well. So we had a strategic transport plan that was a statutory plan for the Games, and some 6 key themes that were in there. Safety and security was one of those themes. So from the very outset, as we were sort of planning what the services would be, so the additional bespoke services, park and ride locations, and shuttle buses that were sort of picking people up in key locations, the temporary integration hubs for the different transport modes, as well as the information to people who were coming to enable them to sort of familiarise themselves with where their events were, what transport system was available to them. Faith talked about the real-time information on the bus network and how important that is for people to know. We did a specific journey planner, that's so people could plan their journeys and plan their journeys back as well. So it's not just about getting to your venue, it's about getting back, and because some of the events finished quite late at night, and there was a lot of communications, travel demand management program that went out, but we did all of that in terms of the safety of the network, in conjunction with West Midlands Police, who had the responsibility for safety and security as well. So they supported us in the design of the transport hubs, the bespoke locations where we had additional services that weren't normally there, so those temporary arrangements as well. And also making sure that we were well covered by additional CCTV, additional temporary lighting where it was needed. There was lots of things that we had to do to make sure that we kept all of those visitors safe and well, even to the point of planning the services. So a lot of people would have stayed overnight if they had multiple tickets, but some people might have wanted to get the last train home. And if the last train home is cancelled, what do you do? So even our colleagues at Network Rail had a plan around New Street Station as how to convert that into somewhere where proper welfare facilities for people who got stranded. Fortunately, we didn't have to use it, but that's just the things that go in the background in terms of planning and making sure that we keep people safe.
Sounds fabulous, Anne. Is there going to be any means of capturing what you learned through that experience and sharing that more widely with other cities and regions that might be hosting similar events?
There's a whole knowledge exchange programme, particularly led by the Commonwealth Games Federation. So they take the knowledge that's learned from city to city to city as they hold these events. We've done a knowledge exchange with Victoria in Australia in terms of, because they've got the next games as well. But we've also shared our experiences more broadly with other so Paris for the 2024 Olympics, and then also Los Angeles were over here as well. Lots of organisations that came to see us during and after the games to share that information, and then that knowledge share in terms of what we've done. We've published some information so it can go more locally here in the UK, particularly for other events that are up and coming as well, just to so that people have got a good understanding about what goes into the planning behind the scenes. It was 6 years in the making, so it is no mean task. Yeah.
Amazing work. Well, thank you both. We'll now move on to the second part of today's session, looking at some interventions on the ground. So I'll hand over to Nia for an overview of what the British Transport Police have been working on, and please send some questions through. Don't let me ask all the questions. Thanks.
Thanks, Becky, and thank you for having me here today. It's a real privilege to be a part of this event. Just for those who aren't aware, British Transport Police are the national police force responsible for the rail network across England, Scotland and Wales. If we can go to the next slide, please. I want to talk to you very briefly about our strategy around tackling violence and intimidation against women and girls. I'm really proud to say that our strategy does in fact predate quite a lot of the strategies that have been talked about today in terms of governmental objectives. We've been working in this space for almost 3 years now with a real focus around this really important topic. And I've just outlined on the screen the 7 key objectives that fall out of our strategy. And the overarching theme through everything that I'll talk about is that working with our partners, violence, abuse and intimidation against women and girls in any form will not be tolerated. And that's a really clear message that is shared with our partners across the rail industry. Anne talked earlier about creating a hostile environment, and that's very much mirrored and complemented within our strategy. We want to make the rail network hostile for anyone considering coming on and committing any kind of offences, but particularly sexual offence and sexual harassment. And we want to ensure that we are identifying and managing offenders so that we get the best possible outcome for our victims and survivors. Recognising that going to court isn't always the preferred option, so we are looking at as many positive judicial outcomes for sexual offences. We want to make the network a safe place for all women and girls, whether you're travelling as a commuter, a member of the public, or you're in fact working as a member of staff on the rail network. We want to make sure that that is safe for you. And as already touched upon by both Anne and Faith, there is that gap and missing piece around technology. So we're working really hard to bridge that. And one of the things I'll talk about shortly is a really positive use of technology. And the last thing is around capturing the voice of women and girls. We can't do this alone within policing. We cannot presume that we know what women and girls want. So we consult at all sorts of levels in terms of hearing the voice and ensuring that we're capturing them within our strategy. Next slide, please. So one of the things we identified quite early on with some work we did back with Transport for London sort of from 2013-14 onwards was that there is a significant amount of underreporting, and particularly underreporting of sexual harassment behaviours. And there is a current gap in legislation in that we do not yet have any kind of law around public sexual harassment. We wanted to do something within BTP to try and address that and bridge that gap. So within our police force, we have defined sexual harassment as any behaviours that are perpetrated against victims which are sexually motivated or have a sexual element, but don't quite reach the threshold of existing legislation under the Sexual Offences Act. We felt this was really important because we know that underreporting is partly due to a lack of awareness of what are the types of behaviours that do constitute harassment. And this includes things like staring, leering, taking inappropriate photographs, making sexual comments, all those things that we know happen to women and girls travelling across the rail network and have been underreported because they felt that they weren't serious enough, that they wouldn't be taken seriously. And our message is, please do report that to us. We will always take you seriously. Nothing is too small and nothing is too trivial to report. We will take action. And that was a really important message for us, and has then contributed to some really important partnership working that I'll talk about now on the next slide. So moving on to the next slide, we have been really keen to promote sexual harassment campaigns across the network, and hopefully some of those images you'll see on the screen will be familiar. You'll have seen them as you've travelled across the network. But essentially, we want to give people the means to report incidents to us. And we want to make it really clear what it is that constitutes sexual harassment and what you can report to us. So we've had really good success in the past with the use of our text service. It gives people that really discreet way of reporting an incident that allows us to take action and has led to some excellent results. And moving to the slides, the images at the bottom, they relate to the campaign that we have done jointly with the Rail Delivery Group, Transport for London and Crime Stoppers. And again, it's a really bold campaign. It really sets out very clearly what those behaviours are, so that if you're a perpetrator, it's clear to you that what you're doing is an offence and will be dealt with by the police. And to those potential victims and survivors, it also sets out the clear position that what you're experiencing is not acceptable and it should be reported, and we're giving you really good means to do that. This was launched back in August 2021, and it's really positive to see that since the campaign went live, we had a significant increase in the number of reports of sexual harassment. At one point, it peaked at a 120% increase in reporting, which to us is hugely positive. It says to us that that awareness has been raised, that the confidence in reporting is increasing, and that hopefully we are starting to gradually claw back that public trust and confidence that we know has been eroded through a lot of high-profile, awful events. Next slide, please. So we know that women and girls are really sick to death of being told to change behaviours. And as Anne mentioned earlier, our stance is that we will not tell women to change their behaviours and that we will focus on the perpetrators. But one thing that we know we needed across the rail network is that wider community feel of everybody having a responsibility that if they see or experience any kind of behaviour, that they should speak up to interrupt that behaviour. So we wanted to introduce some really simple tools, non-confrontational, that we could provide guidance to members of the public where they could step in and take that action. So some of the posters on the screen are just really simple examples of that. So it's just, you know, does the train stop at Peterborough, for example? Where is platform 12? Just that simple intervention can be enough to make a huge difference to that individual and prevent it escalating. We've said that your presence alone can be your greatest superpower. And even after the fact, by simply checking in with that individual who's been targeted can make a huge difference in validating what's happened to them and making them realise that it is unacceptable and that other people are looking out for them. Last slide, please. And as Faith mentioned earlier, we were successful in securing funding under the Safer Streets initiative, and we have used that money to develop a safety app called Railway Guardian, because we understand that underreporting was caused by a lack of technology, and we wanted to do something to facilitate that. But we also wanted to develop something that would be a one-stop shop for safety on the rail network. So what our app does is offer a very simple, intuitive platform with 6 key features. The first one is around support. So we provide links to a number of different charities that will provide that instant support to somebody who is potentially feeling vulnerable on their train journey. We also include guidance documents on a number of subjects, including how to be an active bystander. We have the ability to conduct surveys through the app, again, really allowing us to hear the voices of women and girls and take action. Other information includes things like links to our website, to the TfL and National Rail Inquiries Planner, just so that you've got everything in one place for your journey. We will have the ability to provide messages, whether that's signposting to new guides and information that's being provided, or down the line to have that two-way conversation with the user. And then finally, the reporting function. We have the ability through our text 61016 service to report incidents directly into our control room, where you will get an immediate response and officers deployed if appropriate. And you can do that through the app now through a really simple series of questions. You can also report crime directly through our single online home reporting system, which incorporates the very first completely anonymous reporting process for serious sexual offences. We also provide a link to the TravelSafe tool that's been mentioned by Faith, because we recognise that the journey experience does not end at the railway and that we want to consider the experience of people once they've left our jurisdiction. And finally, we also recognise that feelings of unsafety and insecurity aren't just necessarily related to crime. Environmental factors can affect this. So we've included a reporting tool where if you're travelling and, for example, you feel that CCTV is inadequate, or there's graffiti or a lack of lighting, the app gives the ability to report those concerns directly to the relevant train operator for them to take action. We are moving into the second phase of Railway Guardian. Then we'll be launching a new feature in December where you'll be able to upload videos and photographs directly through a link in the app. And we will also be introducing a geolocation feature, which allows the user to set up their own location sharing services with family, friends as appropriate. Not being tracked by the police at all, because we understand that that is a genuine concern. And it also allows users to have a rescue me function to use within their contacts. So it's a really positive step moving forward. It is constantly evolving, and we're really keen for you to share and download Railway Guardian far and wide across your networks. And if there's any further information that you require on this, I'm happy to share it. Thank you, and I'll pass you back to Becky now.
Thank you very much, Nia, and I'll hand straight to Nikki from Liverpool City Region.
Thank you, Becky, and thank you for inviting me to talk about our work today. It's a real privilege. So I work for the Liverpool City Region Combined Authority, and I'm responsible for the coordination of our TravelSafe partnership here in Merseyside, and I'm also chair of the UTG Safety and Security Group. Can we move on to the next slide, please? So just a little bit of background to our partnership. It's led by ourselves in the Liverpool City region, and it also consists of Merseyside Police, British Transport Police, our local bus and rail operators, and we also have close links with our community safety partnerships and organisations within the area as well, such as Crime Stoppers and Samaritans. We've just signed off our new strategy, 3-year strategy, our partnership board, and we have 3 key aims around keeping a safe and secure public transport net environment. So that's around deterring incidents of crime and antisocial behaviour, achieving further improvements in the perception of personal safety and security, and we do that through passenger engagement, communication, and also how we adapt and respond to a new transport network. So under each of these aims, we have some underlying actions which are ongoing, and some new ones coming through as well. So again, that's around supporting victims of crime, and that includes our key transport workers who do also suffer incidents. And we're also looking at how we ensure our approach to safeguarding is effective. We also do educational support with schools and community groups, and we work very closely with local independent advisory groups and community groups and other organisations to improve our understandings of issues. And again, as Anne and others have mentioned, it's around that safer environment around the transport network. So the network is changing, particularly in our city region, and we are taking that end-to-end journey approach and focusing on designing those crime standards and improving what infrastructure we do have, and looking at that design and maintenance, and also enhancing and making better use of technology. So a key area of focus in the past 12 months has been tackling violence against women and girls. That's in response to national and local strategies and campaigns, and then how we can also implement the Transport Champions recommendations, which Anne talked about earlier. And some of this work has been done through our Safer Streets campaign, working very closely with our partners in the city region. So can we move on to the next slide, please? So our campaign is called Safer Streets Liverpool currently, and that focuses on transport and the nighttime economy in the Liverpool city centre. The campaign was brought about following research that was carried out by Merseyside's Police and Crime Commissioner Emily Spurrell, and supported findings of national research that said that women do not feel safe when using public transport. So the research carried out in Merseyside found that 42% of women had concerns about using public transport in Merseyside during the day, and that rose to 54%, feeling unsafe during the night. 80% of the women also said that poor or no street lighting contributing to feeling unsafe, and 58% of women said that no or limited CCTV contributed to feeling unsafe. So on the basis of that, led by the Merseyside Police and Crime Commission and the Liverpool City Council, a bid was put into the Safer Streets funding initiative, and they were successful in doing that. And I say they had to lead on that bid, but it's supported by a number of partners, including ourselves in the partnership, and also Merseyside Violence Reduction Partnership, and the sexual violence support groups as well. So we've been successful in 2 rounds of the funding now, Safer Streets 3 and Safer Streets 4. So the Safer Streets 4 will now enable us to roll this out across the Merseyside area. And what it is it's a complementary and coordinated range of initiatives, and I'll just talk about some of them through the next slides. Can we have the next slide, please? So again, as others have talked about as well, it's around that behavioural change and change in attitudes. So what we developed with a lot of consultation was an intensive communications campaign targeted at potential perpetrators and highlighting those unacceptable behaviours that people found uncomfortable. So that started in March 20, earlier this year, and it was a campaign particularly for 6 weeks. We had lots of social media assets and on-street communications, and that was at transport hubs, bus stations, rail stations, bus stops, buses, taxis and workplaces. And we supported that with a lot of community engagements and partnership days at key locations. So that was around the transport hubs in the city centre as well, and also engaged with universities, because again that's we had a lot of feedback from university students that they didn't feel safe using public transport too. And that's just some of the images there. So as you can see, the campaign we did was highlighting those behaviours, such as rubbing up against somebody, taking explicit images, that intrusive staring and leering. So again, and what we found is that when we took this around some places, some people weren't aware that these were offences as well. There's also a website that supports all this as well, and that signposts people to support services should they have been a victim of sexual harassment, that they can go to for support and advice. Okay, can I have the next slide, please? Okay, so specifically with the Safer Streets funding, we looked at some of that public transport stuff and some of the things that we could have done. And again, this just highlights some of the work that the transport champions and we found in the round tables when we were doing the research, that people wanted these types of things. So again, we are developing around safe spaces around our buses, on the rail side, at the transport hubs and stations. And through the Safer Streets 4 funding, we've got funding for a new post for 12 months. So they will come in and develop these safe spaces around our bus stations and transport hubs. And it's not just for violence, it's not just for focusing for women and girls, it's for anybody who may be vulnerable whilst they're travelling through those transport hubs. And this person will be coming in, making sure that the policies and procedures are in place to do this safely, so that staff have the knowledge and feel empowered to assist when somebody does come in asking for help or assistance. We've also developed being active bystander awareness, which is a video. This had to be quite short because again this was aimed at bus drivers and other transport staff, so again it's very difficult sometimes for them to have the time for training. So this training is just a 20-minute video which is available on YouTube, and it helps staff understand sexual harassment and violence, how they can intervene as a bystander and how they can respond to disclosures effectively. And it's based around 4 key things. It's around directing, so calmly speaking out and responding to negative behaviour; distracting, so finding a reason to encourage the victim to come to you, so engaging them in a conversation; delegate if support is needed, tell someone and ask for help; or delay. Sometimes it might not be appropriate to do a response at the time, but then again maybe remember to check in with that victim or report it at a later date. Another one, again, the things that we wanted to implement as well, and learn from our colleagues in the West Midlands, was around a text message service. This come very strongly through on the roundtables when we were working with the transport champions, and that people were asking for a text message service to use on the bus, very similar to what BTP have. However, the complexities of trying to do this on the bus network is very difficult, because you're working with Home Office forces and our bus services are going through different force areas. So again, how we do that and how we link that in with police control systems. So what we've managed to introduce is an alternative reporting method for the bus network in Merseyside. And that is particularly, we've marketed it as a non-emergency number. So what happens is that number will go through to our control room, staffed by our staff in our Liverpool City region, and they will look at that information coming through. What will happen as well is when that text service, when somebody texts through to us, they'll get an automated response, and we will remind them that if it's an emergency, please phone 999. We also, when they text, we've got the facility to either text them back with information or to call them if we think that we need to intervene as well. So again, that's very in its early days. So again, it's still very much a pilot and how that is working. And another thing that we've introduced as well is around increased visibility and surveillance. Again, people are always asking for that extra assistance and high visibility, and that's either our own staff or policing. So one of the things that we sort of found from our consultations when we were going for the funding was around the students saying they didn't feel particularly safe on a particular student bus route. So we've now been able to get some extra police and patrols, and they're just offering that on overtime at the moment. So again, that's every weekend now. That started 2 weekends ago. So giving that extra assistance and high visibility, and that's already having some good engagement with the students, and we're finding out some good things and sort of trying to act upon things like that. So again, there's a couple of bus stops that are not lit up. So we're going to look at how we can get those bus stops lit up and things like that. So it's just getting all that feedback about our infrastructure as well. Also along that route, as I say, it's quite a high arterial route for the students, but also just for the general public as well. So with our colleagues in Liverpool City Council through their City Watch, they're going to install 21 extra cameras along that bus route to increase feelings of safety. And what also City Watch have also done is they've enhanced the CCTV in the Liverpool City Centre, especially around those transport locations where we didn't have good coverage. And again, what they've done as well is just based upon people saying they don't know where the CCTV is. We've painted the camera brackets bright yellow and put yellow bands around them, so it's just a little bit more visible, drawing that attention to them. Okay, can we go to the next slide, please? So the final one is, this is not specifically around transport, but it will have an impact upon that culture change, and recognising that we recognise very much that this is a societal issue, and we need a culture change challenging those attitudes and behaviours and how to address the sexual harassment. So working very closely with the Merseyside Violence Reduction Partnership, we looked at the age range and we made a decision that it was to look at those primary school year 6. And going into the schools, and this is very much around the PHSE curriculum, and was developed very much in partnership with teachers and young people. So it's a materials use skills and base practice support a culture change, and they allow for an open and appropriate discussion of topics that the children may find particularly different, such around as consent. And there's also a thing called Family Selfie, which looks at the issues arising from the sharing of online images. And we know this just happens as well in society all the time with the children. And also when we spoke to young people as well, we know these types of things are happening on our transport network too. And as part of that as well, the teachers also have an element of training as well about tackling misogyny and the sexual harassment. So if any of the children are doing that in their schools, they know how to deal with that. And what we found as well is that the teachers who attended this training gave us really good feedback, and they said it would be extremely useful if it could be rolled out further to extend the message to other adults in the city region. So as part of the Safer Streets 4 funding, there will be some complementary work done. So again, this will be very much a distinctive feel around Liverpool, and it'll focus on attitude change and awareness raising to prevent street harassment and encourage that bystander intervention when people see this behaviour, wherever it may be. And that's going to be aimed at delivering that to various workplaces within the Liverpool city area. Again, that's just being developed currently at the moment, so that'll be rolling out in the next few months. And the other one finally is part of the Safer Streets funding as well, is around this feelings about people getting home safely as well. So when they're waiting for the transport to get home and things, there's going to be a nighttime guardian project. So this will be working with other formal methods such as like Merseyside Police and the street pastors in Liverpool, but this will be more peer-to-peer support with the university students for those students out and about, and they will receive formal training how to do that. So as you can see, just to summarise, just the work that we're doing around this, lots of complementary intervention work. We can't just do it again as a transport authority. We need to work very closely with our partners on this, just to change those attitudes, challenge those behaviours. And although the Safer Streets work is focused upon that violence against women and girls, the initiatives that we're implementing will obviously make it and help to make our city region, our transport safer for everyone. So yeah, thank you for listening. I hope you found it useful and informative, and I'll pass you back to Becky now.
Thank you, Nikki, and thanks for all the presentations so far, and thank you for your questions. Now that I can actually see them, I can see there's loads of questions to tackle, which is great. So really interesting there at the end of Nikki's presentation to hear about all the early intervention work that's been going on in education. But I suppose one of the questions that's come in is, are BTP doing anything like that in schools, intervening with boys at an early age, or how widespread is that kind of early intervention work, or is it kind of rather patchy? I wonder if Faith or Nia would like to come in on that one.
Yeah, sure. We are definitely including that within our objectives and our strategy, because unfortunately we know that we do get a lot of young victims and perpetrators of sexual harassment on the rail network. So it's really important that we do intervene at that earliest opportunity, and also supported by the National Police Chief Council approach. We will be looking at streamlining a package that can be delivered across the country.
And if I just come in as well there, so as part of the VAWG strategy, the Department for Education have got commitments in this space around education, schools and kind of healthy relationships. So the lead from government is very much the Department for Education, but we are engaging with them at an official level as well to seek how we can kind of inform those programmes and bring the transport perspective to it, and make sure that they're considering how behaviour on the transport network is also a space that needs to be educated about, as well as in schools or playgrounds, etc.
Thank you both. And coming back to Anne and also to Nikki, thinking about practical improvements on the ground in terms of infrastructure, which are the ones that seem to be proving most effective in reducing actual crime against women and girls, or fear of crime? For example, how important is lighting? Which interventions seem to be working the best? Should I come to you, Nikki, first?
Yeah, I think again we're very much in sort of like the infancy of trying to find out exactly those interventions. So I think again, certainly the work we've been doing around the student population, I think they are looking around at those kinds of things. It's around those lighting, and then sort of maybe getting home safer as well. Again, our transport network finishes at a certain time, so again it's looking at those interventions as well. Sort of thing is, how can we make the transport network go on a little bit longer because those people are not getting home safely. That transport networks again. So again, I think it's around lighting. It's also around that visible presence as well. So I think they've been welcoming that visible presence on that bus network as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'd just echo what Nikki's just said as well. I think it's not just about the actual crimes as well. It's about the perception of crime, which prevents women and girls from using the public transport system. Lighting absolutely is something which people really just want to make sure that they can be seen and they can see what's around them as well. Staff and other people out on the network, as people that they can trust, as somebody there that can help. That's not always available on the transport network. We have to manage it in the way that we do. But I think particularly the nighttime economy is something. And one of the things that I haven't mentioned, and Nikki's probably just touched on it there as well, is that part of the transport system is taxis. and we've definitely seen a reduction in the number of taxi drivers post-COVID, particularly black cabs in our city centres as well. And one of the things that I'm sort of looking at is how can we look at the nighttime economy? It's an important part of our economy now, and certainly all of our transport data on people's travel preferences is sort of pointing to the leisure as the big growth in transport as opposed to commuting, because we're working in very different ways now as well. And I think it's really important for us to start thinking about the services on public transport and how we're also working with taxi drivers as part of this as well. And we've got lots of independent, self-employed taxi drivers that need to be part of this work, making sure that they can be trusted people, and they're keeping people safe as well. So part of that training stuff that we talked about. I think they're probably the big things, Becky, that people come back to us about. And again, it's the night time where the most issues are. And then somebody also mentioned school kids. We had a session yesterday with our crime reduction unit, particularly targeting the sort of 3 till 5 o'clock school run on the bus network as well, and some of the vulnerable kids that might come across as being the people who are conducting crime or antisocial behaviour, but actually have some very complex needs as well. So it's how do we support kids who need us where they don't get that support elsewhere.
There's an interesting follow-up question in the Q&A about the education work. Is there any training or education provided for pupils' parents, because attitudes are often picked up from home? Does anyone want to come in on that? Yeah,
there is a lot of training, and certainly we work with West Midlands Police, and I think Nikki does the same locally up in Liverpool as well. We are training bus drivers and our tram drivers in terms of being able to spot certain kinds of behaviour. So both behaviour from a vulnerable person who's so they can recognise that, but also behaviours of people who might be looking to commit different kinds of crime, whether it's sexual abuse or whatever, which does happen on our public transport network. And the training is then how can they then handle that safely, and how do they call upon? So there's training in terms of that in respects of transport workers. We also, similar to Nikki, we have a whole schools programme as well, and I think this happens up and down in different authorities. So again, working with school kids, but I think how do you get to parents in particular, and how do you get to parents who aren't as interested in their children as some parents are as well? And that's probably a tough one. I don't know whether anybody else on here has actually cracked that one as well.
And I think just based on what Anne was saying there, I think it's just getting into those adults and those parents, isn't it? So I think this is what the new part of the campaign is around, about the adult education. So again, getting into the parents sort of thing. So hopefully we do it through the workplaces, and then hopefully we can roll that out elsewhere. So again, it's a bit of a pilot about educating adults about those behaviours as well, and if their children are saying those types of things as well. So yes, so I'll let you know more once we've sort of implemented that one.
Thanks, Nikki. And a question. Oh, sorry, Faith.
Sorry, just so on that subject as well. I think the national campaigns, like the one the Home Office are running with Enough, the joint campaign between BTP and RDG that Nia kind of put on the screen, of just identifying the types of behaviours that really aren't acceptable, and sort of shifting that public conversation, and that's that social awareness of what behaviours aren't acceptable. I think the more we can do that in our public spaces with those communication campaigns, hopefully that changes the conversation that's happening in private for example, between parents and children.
Yeah, and I think those active bystander campaigns are excellent, just in giving people easy ways to safely intervene. Yeah. When a lot, before you may have been very nervous about getting involved, but just to provide those simple steps that people can take, I think is really valuable. A couple of questions coming specifically for Nia. Are you sufficiently resourced at BTP to respond to all the issues that come through to you on the apps and on the text service? And what action can the police actually take against perpetrators of the more low-level, so-called low-level forms of harassment?
Yeah, so I'll cover off the second part first. Although I've mentioned that there is no public sexual harassment legislation in place, there are other bits of legislation that are appropriate to be used. So, for example, the Public Order Act covers a lot of elements that cause people harassment, alarm and distress. So what we will do is look at where it best meets existing legislation. We also have the benefit on the rail network of bylaws, which would cover off slightly lower level. I say lower level reticently because to that victim, it's not a low level and the impact could be huge. So, you know, we have that ability using the existing legislation that we will flag as sexually motivated, which allows us to understand that data a bit better. And in terms of our ability to respond, it's challenging. You know, we are sending the message out. We want people to report and we have to be able to give a proportionate response. So we do have some really rigid structures in place to allow us to almost triage the reports as they come in. Ensuring that at the very minimum, we will respond to that individual to thank them for reporting it to us, because every report is so important. So yeah, depending on the level, it may well be that that's as far as it goes, but otherwise we have teams set up specifically to deal with any reports, particularly of the higher sort of legal offending sexual offences.
Okay, thank you very much, Nia. I'm afraid we're running really low on time now, so perhaps I could just come to each of you really quickly with your top idea that we can use across the transport network to make women's journeys safer. What would be your priority? If I come to you first, Faith.
I'm going to cheat slightly, and it is the fact that it's across the transport network and it's seeing it as that full journey, door to door, and having that holistic view of the journey. That's my focus.
Anne?
So how do I top that one, Faith? But yeah, absolutely, the holistic view. And we've got quite a lot of investment going on in the transport sector. So through city, region, sustainable transport settlements, active travel funding. It's how do we bring that all together to make sure that we're designing it in the right way, holistically as well, the end-to-end journey, and we're designing in all of the things that are needed as part of that to keep every vulnerable person who's using the transport network safe as well. And that really comes from how do we sort of integrate that approach across the different departments within DFT as well, so that we can do that in a much more holistic way. That would be my one thing that I want to make sure happens.
Thank you, Anne. Nia, very quickly.
Gosh, yeah, continue the joint up work, the support of everything that we're all trying to achieve together. And from my perspective, please encourage people to download Railway Guardian.
Nikki?
Oh, how do I top all that? I think for me, I think the benefit is working with your partners as well. It's not just looking at the transport thing, it's looking at, as I say, the whole journey and working together, because I think that's what we found doing this, the work through the Safer Streets. We're all doing little bits differently, but we're all joined together on the same, yeah, we're trying to do the same thing and achieve the same things.
Absolutely. Well, I'm sorry we didn't manage to get to all of your questions, but we will be passing the remaining questions across to the speakers who will try their best to answer any that we've missed. We'll be circulating the slides and sharing the link to the recording of the session, hopefully by the end of the day. That will be on YouTube, and you can also watch back all the other Gender on the Agenda webinars so far, which are all really great. Final thank you to all of our wonderful speakers, to Juliana and Mark at Landor, and to our sponsors, Mott, MacDonald and Urban Transport Group. Thank you all for joining us and have a great afternoon.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.